Hi guys, today we're going to focus on the poetry text, which is very similar to attacking the text. The first two steps are even the same. You're still going to preview the poem, look at the author, try to see if you can come up with prior knowledge. You're still going to chunk. This is usually done by stanzas. And then you're going to establish that purpose for reading. Then you're going to read the poem once, and after each chunk or stanza, you're going to write an about statement about what's going on. This is kind of crucial because oftentimes poetry can be confusing to students. So if you make sure to do these about statements, that will help make what the author is saying a little bit more clear. Then you're going to read it again, but this is where the difference is. Excuse me. You're going to establish after the second read who is the speaker. Now, the big thing with this is students always want to put that the author is the speaker. The author is not the speaker for the most part. You need to think about who is a character that would be saying this poem. That is the speaker. Okay, so make sure that you're not putting the author here, but who is a character that would be saying this? Who's observing what's going on in this poem? Okay, that then becomes the speaker. The next thing you're going to do is what is happening in the poem. This is the action and event. You're going to establish when and where is the action and event taking place in the poem, and how does the speaker seem to feel about the action event. With the how, I would always start positive or negative. Does the speaker seem to be positive? Does the speaker seem to be negative? And then I would add words that are either positive words of how they might feel or negative words of how they might feel. Right? And an author can switch. They can maybe start positive and then move to negative, and just make note of that in this part. How does the speaker feel? Okay. At that same time, you're looking for things like poetic devices, figurative language, the mood, the tone, the theme. All of those also happen after the second, or if you need to, a third read. Okay. So I'm going to model for you using the Soft Rains poem. So again, this poem was in the story actually that we read, and it's titled "There Will Come Soft Rains, Wartime." So already we have a little bit more information than we had in the story. This is definitely wartime. So that kind of gives us an idea about the setting to keep in mind as we're reading the poem. So I'm going to do this a little bit different than I did with the story. I'm just going to read the poem once through from beginning to end, and then we'll go back and kind of look at each chunk, just because that's how kind of poetry is meant to be read. Okay. So there will come soft rains, wartime. There will come soft rains in the smell of the ground, and swallows circling with their shimmering sound, and frogs in the pools singing at night, wild plum trees in tremulous right. Robins will wear their feathery fire, whistling their whims on a low fence wire. And not one will know of the war, not one will care at last when it is done. Not one would mind, neither bird nor tree, if mankind perished utterly. And spring herself, when she woke at dawn, would scarcely know that we were gone. Okay, so I'm going to quickly go over each of the chunks and kind of process what's going on. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to define some vocabulary. So if you didn't know, or you may not know, that swallows is a bird. So I'm just going to, as a kind of bird, define that off to the side here. Okay. Let's see, what else do we maybe need to define? Tremulous, or excuse me, tremulous. That actually means, put that over here. Also, like we did in the past, when I'm typing on here, you're typing on your poem. So tremulous means a shaking slightly. Okay. Whims might be a word that you don't know. This is a sudden desire. So we're going to define that. And perished might be a word that you don't know or are unsure of. And we're going to define that as meaning suffering deaths suddenly. Okay, so we defined first. Now we're going to go back and look at each chunk and write about statements. So for my purposes here, I did the chunks as actually 2 stanzas because they were such small stanzas. So for stanza 1, there will come soft rains in the smell of the ground, and swallows circling with a shimmering sound, and frogs in the pool singing at night, and wild plum trees in tremulous white. So for this chunk, it seems as though there's rain, right? There's some sort of soft rain, and while the rain is going on, nature's just kind of flourishing. It's just going about its business, okay? So rain will come while nature thrives. When nature is thriving. So nature seems to just be going about its business, right? So that is our first 2 stanzas. Now we're going to go down to our next 2. Robins will wear their feathery fire, whistling the winds on the low fence wild, and not one will know the war, not one will care at last when it is done. So in this one, it seems again that nature's just kind of going about its business, but that there is this war that's going on, and nature doesn't even seem to notice it. It won't affect nature, essentially. So there will be a war, but nature won't notice. It will continue on normally. Okay, so that is our about statement for our second group there of stanza 3 and 4. So that leaves us our last stanzas. Not one would mind, neither bird nor tree, if mankind perished utterly, and spring herself when she woke at dawn would scarcely know that we were gone. So in this one, it seems that just like before, nature wouldn't notice if there was a war or when it was done. They also wouldn't even notice if mankind perished. So if there was no longer humans, nature would still go on without us, okay? And would probably not even really notice. So nature would keep going even if humans were gone. Okay, so that was our step 1, where step 2, we previewed, we chunked, then we read it once through, and we defined vocabulary, and we did our about statements on our left side. Now we need to do step 3, which is we're going to read it again. So I'm going to quickly give you some time to kind of scan it again. So take a moment. Okay, so now we're going to answer these questions. The first one is, who is the speaker? A character narrating the poem, not the author. And I like to answer questions in red just because it's easier for me to look at when I'm grading. So who is the speaker? And we don't need to write in complete sentences for this. So I got to ask myself, who would be saying this? And it would be probably someone that is observing nature during wartime, right? So that is the who. So we know it's someone during wartime because of the title, because it mentions war in there, and the fact that mankind is gone. And then obviously they're paying attention to what's going on with nature. So that's where we get the someone observing nature during wartime. Okay, so what is happening in the poem? What's that action or event? And in this, the action essentially is that nature is just being nature, right? It's continuing on even during a war. Okay, so... Okay, nature continues even during a war. Where is the action taking place? Well, we don't know specifically, but it's clearly out in nature because we have these descriptions of birds and plum trees and robins and a frog. So we know that, or we can assume that this is taking place out in nature. And when is it taking place? Well, I don't have like a specific time, and that's okay. The when can be anything. It can be morning, noon, night. It can be springtime, summertime, wintertime. It can be specific date. Sometimes it's general, sometimes it's more specific. In this case, we know that it's taking place during war. Or after a war. Okay. And again, with the how does the speaker feel? So remember, if the speaker is someone observing nature during wartime, so how do we think they feel? So we got to look at the diction, the word choice, and decide, is the diction mainly positive? Is it negative? We're going to start there. It seems in some places kind of positive about that nature just keeps going, but then you also have this underlying wartime going on. So it's kind of a little gloomy, that this idea that mankind can perish and that nature wouldn't know. So I'm going to lean a little bit more towards negative, and I think that that is one of the words that I would use to describe how the author feels, kind of gloomy, maybe a little hopeless, but also reflective, like looking at nature and understanding where their place in nature is. So again, the who is the speaker is someone observing nature during wartime. When is it or what is happening is that nature continues even during a war. Where is the action taking place? In nature. When is it action taking place? During war or after war? And how does the speaker seem to feel? Kind of gloomy, hopeless, but also very reflective on their place in society. Okay, so that was the first part of our second read. The next part is to identify our literary elements. Okay, so the very first line we have here, we see this smell the ground. So I'm going to highlight that, and that is imagery, because remember this plays on the five senses, so you can almost smell that you get when the rain comes and the ground smells. Okay, and then you have swallows circling with shimmering sound. This is called alliteration. You have that sound repeated. That is kind of a rhyming a rhyming tool or device. Okay, and then you have frogs in the pool singing. We have that word singing at night. Okay, this is kind of two things here. Again, we have that, like you can hear it. So you have imagery, but you can also, frogs don't really sing. That's a human quality, so that is personification. Okay, let's see. So then we go down to the next chunk. Robins will wear. So we have these feathery fire. Again, you can kind of see the feathers by the way they're described. So that's imagery. But we also have personification, because wearing is a human quality. Okay. Then we have, and not one will know. When they're talking about one, they're talking about nature in general and things like birds and stuff. So that also is personification. Okay, of nature. And then really nothing in that next chunk. But then you have spring herself when she woke at dawn. Again, spring, that's a human quality, waking up. So again, we have personification. And in all these instances, the author is personifying nature, which then lends this idea that we don't need humans, and nature won't even know about humans because nature is already personified as a human. It's already functioning very human-like. Okay, so they wouldn't even know if humans were there anymore or not. Okay, so we have identified our literary terms. We've answered the questions. We are done with attacking the poetry text. Again, make sure that you have all of this in your own copy of this. Make sure that you've typed everything. If you need to pause the video, you can. Thanks, guys.